you happen to be among our visitors today, we're just delighted that you are with us. Invite you back even this evening as we gather for a song service, which we will be singing praises to God. This is worship, and as we talked about last week, there's certain benefits that we gain from our singing praises to God together. Book of Judges. I appreciate Adam reading those verses for us out of Judges chapter 6. The book of Judges is an interesting book. It is a book of transition. I don't know if you realize that or not. It's a book that God has placed in the Bible that shows us the transition that occurred with the people of God between the times of the death of Joshua, who had been the hand-picked successor to Moses, who led them then into the promised land, and the time that the first King Saul, came along. And this transition period was an interesting period. As a matter of fact, we look at this period very often as the dark ages of Israel. As a matter of fact, you read in Judges chapter 17 and verse 6 to sort of describe the problems that occurred during that period of time. You find that there was no king in Israel, and so every man did what was right in his own eyes. And that's sort of what was going on at this particular time. And believe me, that produces some dark ages. There's no question about that. It produces a dark time, religiously, morally, and ethically, and anything that has to do with the way that a society would run. It just simply goes down the drain. And you take during this period of time, it's sort of created a cycle of events. You would have the children of Israel who would engage in sinful activities such as involving themselves in idolatry, and then they would, rebel against God, and God would send a people upon them to punish them. He would send people like the Philistines or the Ammonites or the Midianites that would come upon the children of Israel and punish them for their sin. And this would go on for a while, and the children of Israel would then cry out to God and ask God to intervene on their behalf, and God would relent. And then God would raise up a judge to lead them out of their problems with these people, the Perizzites or the Midianites or the Philistines or whomever. And so God would raise up a judge, and they would repent, and they would serve God for a while, and there would usually be a few years of peace and prosperity as a result of that. And then all of this would occur again. And just kind of a cycle was going on in the book of Judges. The sin, the punishment, the crying out to God, the raising up of a judge, and the relenting, and there being then some times of peace. And this is what is occurring right here. If you look at the last verse of chapter 5 of the book of Judges, you find that upon the death of Deborah, the judge who led them out of some of the problems that they were having, the land then had rest for 40 years. But notice how chapter 6 begins. Chapter 6 begins, then the children of Israel, after this 40 years of peace and prosperity, then the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hand of Midian for 7 years. And so now they've sinned again. This cycle has started all again. And now God is punishing them by sending the Midianites upon them. And if you read all of this chapter, you find the Midianites are pretty hard taskmasters. As a matter of fact, what they were doing is, they'd let Israel plant some vineyards, and they'd let Israel plant some crops, and they'd let Israel have some herds and some flocks, and then what they would do, the Midianites would sweep in and destroy their crops. Midianites would sneak in or sweep in and destroy their herd. And these people were starving to death. And they weren't able to get ahead. They had to live in the caves and in the holes in the mountains, and just to kind of get out of the Midianites. They were just scraping together anything they could find to eat. And the Midianites were just taking every bit of substance that they had. And so they cried out to God. Oh God, we're sorry. Oh God, will you send us a deliverer? And so then God sets his sights upon Gideon. And he's saying, Gideon, I'll tell you what Gideon is doing at this time. Gideon is threshing some wheat. But he's doing it in a wine press, and a wine press was in the ground. And so actually he would have been hiding underground to thresh this wheat so that the Midianites wouldn't come in and steal it. And so the Lord sends an angel to talk to Gideon, because God has his sights set upon Gideon as being the deliverer of Israel. Verse 11, now the angel of the Lord came and sat under the terebinth tree, which was in Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, while his son Gideon threshed wheat in the winepress in order to hide it from the Midianites. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, the Lord is with you, you mighty man of valor. And so what God is doing is calling Gideon to be the judge that would bring them out of this captivity. And so God said through the angel, I'm with you. You man of valor, I'm going to use you. But I want you to notice what Gideon's initial response was. Notice how he responds to the Lord. Gideon said to him, "Oh my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us?" You kidding me? Are you kidding me, right? You're telling me that God is with us and we're going through what we're going through? You're joking me, right, angel? You come in here and you tell me that the Lord is with me, and look at what I'm doing. I am in a hole in the ground threshing wheat to keep these Midianites from coming in and taking all that I've got. If the Lord is with me, why is this happening to me? If the Lord is with us, as you say, then you tell me, why am I going through everything that I'm going through? Why are we starving to death? Why are our little ones dying as a result of not getting anything to eat? Tell me, if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Now, what do you think about that response that Gideon had? I got to tell you, you look at that and you see Gideon, he's a little bit petulant here. He's a little bit sullen, is he not? He's a little snappy to God. He's kind of snapping out a little bit at God. And as a matter of fact, I would even say he's a little bit ill-tempered here. But now that's not anything that we would ever do, is it? That's not anything that we would ever say to God, is it? When things begin to fall apart in our lives, we would never snap out at God and say, God, if I'm your child and you love me and I'm serving you and you're going to save me, then why is all that? We'd never say that, would we? You know, the truth of the matter is, my friends, that is a song that has been sung countless times throughout every generation. That old refrain is on the lips of people who claim to love God and serve Him. And even people whom I know love God and serve Him. That's been on their lips many times. Gideon is not the only one who has ever made statements like that. We look at the condition of our lives and we very often wonder, is God really still there? Or we look at the things that are going on in our lives and we actually, well, I know that God is there, but what good is God? If I'm going through all of these things, really what good does it do for me to serve God? If I'm going through all of the problems and trials in my life and I'm hurting, where is God when I hurt? We ever say that? We ever say, why God do you let this happen? We had some announcements made this morning that are traumatic announcements. And we had prayer led on behalf of some of these that were announced this morning. And how many of us, when we hear announcements like that, why is this happening? If God is with us and we are the people of God, then somebody stand up and tell me, why are these things happening? You know as well as I do. This is a thought that has penetrated us and drifted through our minds time after time after time. If we're like everybody else, and I presume that we are. Job said when he was going through all of the problems that he was going through in chapter 7 and verse 20, why, God? Notice that word, what? A little three-letter word. Why have you set me in your target? Why do you have these crosshairs, God, on my back? Why am I sick? Why are my children dead? Why am I now busted and dead broke? Why are these things? Mary and Martha, at the death of their brother Lazarus, in John chapter 11, they had these whys going through their mind as well. Jesus finally shows up after Lazarus has been dead 4 days, and Mary and Martha both, in chapter 11, verses 21 and 32, says, Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Why, Lord, did you let this happen to me? You see, the same concept that old Gideon was dealing with back in the Old Testament. Why, Lord? You could have prevented this. If you'd just been here, this would not have happened. Why? Then I look at our Lord as He hung upon the cross and He cried out to God, my God, why have you forsaken me? Jesus felt alone and forsaken at that time, Matthew 27:46. Why? I remember a few years ago, I was called by some people that I barely knew. And they asked me to participate in a funeral. Not unlike the funeral that's going to occur due to the announcement that was made this morning about this young couple who lost their child. They had a child that was born dead, and they asked me if I would conduct the graveside service for this child. I went to the cemetery. It was a cold winter day. The ground was frozen, spitting a little bit of snow, and I'm standing there by this little casket, sitting there about to be placed into the ground, and I look over at this young couple, and they're just holding on to one another, trying to keep from shaking and freezing to death. And I think, man, this is a lousy day for a funeral. Then I begin to think, as far as what this couple is going through, any day is a lousy day. What do I say to this couple? What do I say to this couple that's burying this child that never had a chance to draw breath and to live a moment upon this earth? I sat by the bedside of a woman dying of breast cancer, and her body had shriveled away due to the cancer that had permeated her entire existence. And she held out that little bony hand to me and took hold of my hand and says, would you pray that God would let me live to see my granddaughter grow up? What do you say to a woman like that? Don't you feel the same thing that Gideon felt? God, if you are with me, why is this happening to me? I remember the first moments that I got to know my good friend and beloved brother Randall McPherson. We were sitting in the parking lot of a restaurant after having gone in and eaten on our way back from Nashville, Tennessee. Randall, a hulk of a man at 6'4", 200 and some odd pounds, sitting beside me in the car, began to relate to me the death of his 17-year-old son, Ricky. And it wasn't long into this conversation that this hulk of a man began to shake and tremble and cry. What do I say to him? How am I able to respond to somebody like that? Don't you feel sometimes of responding much like Gideon responded? God, if you are with us, why am I going through these things? What do you say to a mother whose daughter was raped, tortured, and murdered? What do you say to her? What words of comfort are you able to reach into your reservoir and pull out and help? What do you say to a man who spent the last year or 2 years watching his wife succumb to cancer, shrivel up and die, what do you say to him? Who had to bury his wife and is never going to see her children grow up. I tell you what I wished I could say. I wished I could say to people, these things are not going to happen. I wished I could say to you this morning that if you love God and you serve Him and you devote yourself to living for Him for the rest of your life, you will never undergo these things. I wished I could say they would never happen, but they will, and they do. In this world you will have tribulation. Jesus said that in John 16 and verse 33. This is the reality of life. That being the reality of life, I'll tell you something else that I wished I could say to people. I wished I could say to people like the couple who buried their child. Or I wished I could say to people like the mother who got word that her daughter was raped, tortured, and murdered. I wished I could say to them, hey, time will heal these wounds, and you will be able to go on. I wished I could tell these hurting people that, things are going to get back to normal. You're going to get past all of this. But the truth is, ladies and gentlemen, it will never be the same. That's the truth of the matter. A man by the name of George Herbert said, grief melts away like snow in May, as if there is no such cold thing. When I read that, I wanted to believe that. I wanted to grasp that. I wanted to live by that. And thinking that all of the grief that I feel, and all of the pain that is in my heart, and all of the trials and tribulations, that all of these would just melt away like snow in the springtime. But the cold reality is, even if it melts away for a while, it comes back like an avalanche, doesn't it? There are things that trigger the hurt and trigger the pain and trigger the anxiety. We understand that. This is the reality of it, and I think gospel preachers and elders and teachers and Christians in general need to deal with that fact. There's always going to be that empty chair at the holidays. Time is not going to change that. Birthdays are never going to be the same again. Mother's Day will not be celebrated anymore when Mama's gone. That doesn't change. Time doesn't change those kinds of things. That's the reality of life, and that is probably what was behind Gideon's question. God, if you're with us, why are all of these things happening? I know in reality what we think we want. What we believe that we want, ladies and gentlemen, is a life free of pain. Don't we really long for the fact that we could just live here upon this earth pain-free, disease-free? That none of these things that we experience would ever occur. We want perfect health. And we long for a perfect family. We long to have many comfortable possessions. And we long to have, tremendous abilities and opportunities to perform those abilities. This is what we're looking for. And this is what we think we deserve, and this is what we think we want. And when we don't have this perfection around us, we cry out to God and we want to know why. Lord, if you're with me, why don't I have these things, or why are these things occurring? But you just stop and think about something for a moment. If it were possible to have these things, then why? Why did James write in James chapter 1, verses 2 and 3, that we are to count it all joy when we fall into various trials, knowing that the trying of our faith produces patience? If perfection was what was needed, and perfection is what God intended for us to have, then why did God say it benefits you to have trials in your life? Why did God say, count it all joy when you undergo these things? I was reading something one time about a man who had a car accident and broke his neck. Or at least he broke a bone in his neck. And there were some things that he was saying about the examination that he was undergoing on the emergency room table. It got my attention. And it helped me to deal with some of the things that I'm talking about here. He said after the EMTs had gotten there and they realized that he had some neck trauma, they didn't realize what the extent of it was. They placed him on a board, they strapped him on a board, they took him to the emergency room, and he said the pain was unbearable. And he said they didn't give him anything for his pain. And the doctors came in and they began to examine him, and you know what they were doing? They were taking needles and they were probing his legs and his arms and his feet. And in conjunction with the pain that he felt from the auto accident, he was feeling all of this other. And he said every time that a doctor would put a needle in him, he would say, "Do you feel this?" And he said, "Yes." And the doctor would say, "Does it hurt?" And he said, "Yes." And then he said the doctor would say, "That's good." How is that so? How can that be good? Because here's what the medical field understands. Pain is a proof of life. If there had been spinal cord injury, there would have been no pain. There would have been no life in these limbs. Pain is a proof of life. Medicine is not able to help a body that feels no pain. That's why they are quadriplegics. There is no longer life in those bodies. And this is the way that it is in our life. If everything were perfect, if my family was perfect, if my health was perfect, if everything in my life was exactly what I long for it to be, then I'm going to tell you something, I would not need God in my life. There would be no need for the great physician. You see, but when there is pain, there is a need for healing. When there is pain, there is a need for the great physician. You know, sometimes the things that we consider to be blessings and advantages are actually curses and actually disadvantages. You know, just like what I'm talking about here. You know, just like if I'm numb because of a spinal injury and there's no life in my limbs. If everything is perfect in my life, then I'm numb to my need for God. I won't need to worship God. I don't need to honor God. I don't need to pray to God. I don't need to petition God. I don't need to thank God. Everything is perfect in my life. But you see, when there's pain in my life, and when there are troubles in my life, and when my life is undergoing all of these fiery trials, then I know how dependent I am upon God. Then I know to cry out to God in my time of despair and in my time of distress. If I'm not undergoing pain and I'm not undergoing tribulation, then I'm going to tell you something. I don't need God, and I don't anticipate heaven, and I don't long for the reality of the time where there is no pain and the glories of heaven. Now, don't misunderstand me here. I'm not suggesting that God sends calamities to force us to serve Him. But what I am saying to you this morning is that during these calamities, we can turn to Him. And when we do, He then turns our adversities into blessings. But that's going to take faith on our part. That's going to take trust on our part. I'm reminded of what the Apostle Peter said in John 6 and verse 68, when all of the disciples or many of the disciples were walking away from Jesus. Peter looked Jesus looked at Peter and said to him, "Will you also leave?" Peter said, "Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. You are the answer to all of the problems and the needs that I could ever have." And this is why he would later write in 1 Peter 5 and verse 7, that we as Christians can cast our care, and we have many cares. We cast our care upon Him, for He cares for us. A man by the name of Samuel Johnson said one time, when a man knows he is about to be hanged, it concentrates his mind wonderfully. You know, it took me a while to understand that. I don't kind of speak in that kind of language. But you know what he said? He said, when you know you're about to die, you begin to focus. And you know what becomes a priority. And you know what is important? A man about to die, I'm going to tell you something, he doesn't care what kind of car is parked in the driveway, believe me. When a man is facing death and he is about to step into eternity, he doesn't care how much money is in the bank account. There are other things that are on his mind. He focuses his mind wonderfully. I don't know if you ever heard of a man by the name of Paul Simon. I'm not talking about the singer. Paul Simon was a senator in the state of Illinois. He was an extremely liberal senator, a lot I disagreed with that Simon advocated. Simon developed cancer. Simon has passed away now. Paul Simon developed cancer, and he was being interviewed on television during his battle with cancer. And the interviewer asked Paul Simon, said, Senator, looking back upon your life and what it is that you're facing now, are there things that you wished you could have accomplished in the Senate that were unaccomplished? Is there legislation that you wished you could have steered through that you did not get? Now that your life is winding down, what is it that you wish you could have accomplished in the Senate? Do you know what Simon's answer to that was? He said, the only thing that I would wish to accomplish is to spend one more day with my family. You see, when you're facing death, it concentrates your mind wonderfully. Oh, God, if you're with me, why are all of these things happening to me? Terrible things are going to happen. Terrible things are going to happen to Christian people. I wish that I could say that becoming a Christian is going to somehow eliminate all of the problems of life. It will not. Very often it may even compound the problems of life. But I'm going to tell you, we have an unmatched promise that's contained in the Scriptures. In the 8th chapter of the book of Romans, I want you to remember what it is that the Apostle Paul says in verse 28. And we know, not we think, not there is a possibility. Paul said as a Christian, and we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to His purpose. And again, Paul is not saying that the tragedies that occur in our life are good things, but what he says is these tragedies can be turned into good things. They don't have to separate us from God. It is a proof that there is life when we experience pain. And he goes on to point out in verse 37 of that same chapter, yet in all these things, that's after he talks about the things that are unable to separate us from God. And yet in all these things we are more than conquerors through Him who loved us. You see what God is doing here? God is not holding out for us any false optimism. What God is saying is you're going to have problems. You're going to have issues in this life. But what I'm offering to you is redemption, and I'm offering to you comfort, and I'm offering to you hope, and I'm offering to you life. Yes, you're going to undergo these things. But understand that I'm going to enter into your life, and I'm going to enter into your existence, and I'm going to carry you through to the other side. Let me ask you a question. Think in your mind for a moment. Who is the only one, who is the only person, who is the only disciple in the New Testament that ever personally, face to face, confessed that Jesus is God. Which is the only disciple that ever looked upon the face of Jesus. I'm not talking about writing about it as the Apostle Paul did. But I'm talking about what disciple looked eye to eye with Jesus and confessed that He is God. You say, Peter, you're wrong. You say, John, the apostle of love, again, you're wrong. The apostle, the disciple, the follower of Jesus who looked Him in the eye and confessed that He was God was doubting Thomas. Yes, Johnny come lately Thomas. The Thomas who said, you've got to prove it to me. And when Jesus said, touch my nail-scarred hands, put your hand in here and touch where the spear went in. And Thomas did. And he looked Jesus in the eye and he said, my Lord and my God. You know what Thomas realized at that point? Thomas realized something that Gideon was unable to realize and that every disciple ought to realize. That he was looking upon God who had stooped to take the sins and the pain and to offer redemption and offer comfort and to offer hope. That's not going to eliminate our problems. But what it does is it produces help for those problems. My Lord and my God. By the way, Gideon was never given an answer to his question. Job was never given an answer to his question. Jesus on the cross was never given an answer to his question. And you know what? We're not going to be given an answer either. All the whys that we can muster, all of the questions that we can ask, all of the where are you, Lord, when I hurt, those questions are not going to be answered. What God tells us is that we need to trust Him. No matter what you're going through, no matter the issues that you face, all God says is, I want you to trust me. I want you to trust that you are more than conquerors. I want you to trust that even though your life seems to be falling apart, I will put it back together. Trust me. God's not saying, I'm going to give you the answers to these things. Then we would be walking by sight. God says, just trust me. Notice the times in the Scriptures. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Do you trust that? Is this something upon which you build your life? When you're experiencing the things that we've talked about during the course of our study, are you able to find comfort in your relationship with God? For He Himself has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. Do you trust that promise? Is it something upon which you can build your life? Trust me is what God says. Yes, you're going to experience some heartaches. You're going to go to the cemetery and bury somebody that is precious to you. You're going to get information that's going to break your heart. But God says, I won't leave you. Trust me. Let us come boldly to the throne of grace that we may find grace to help in time of need. Do you believe that? What's the use in praying? God, if you're with me, why are these things happening? To you, O Lord, I lift up my soul. We sing that. That's been put to music. Oh my God, I trust in you. Let me not be ashamed. Let not my enemies triumph over me. Do you really trust these promises? Then if we do, we're not going to be crying out as Gideon did, as so many have done and so many will do, oh God, where are you when I hurt? If you are really with me, why am I going through all of these things? I think of some people in the Scriptures. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We know the story of them in Daniel chapter 3. You know, they didn't cry out, oh God, if you're with us, this flaming fire in this fiery furnace is not going to hurt us. No, our God is able. Our God is able. We trust Him to deliver. If we're burned up, that's okay. Because we trust the Lord. Then there's John the Baptist. I tell you, did you ever stop and think about John the Baptist, the forerunner of Jesus? John is languishing in prison. And John sent some of his disciples to Jesus and asked, are you the one that's coming? Are you the coming one, or do we look for another? And Jesus told the disciples of John in chapter 11, He said, you go back and tell John what you see and what you hear. The blind are able to see, the deaf are able to hear, the lame walk, the poor have the gospel preached to them. But you know, that doesn't do John a lot of good. He's in prison. He's about to have his head cut off. And then Jesus adds this little caveat. And blessed is he who is not offended because of me. John, I'm not going to get you out of prison. And so don't be offended. Just endure to the end. Just trust me. Then there is Job, or the Apostle Paul, rather. 2 Corinthians chapter 12. Had the thorn in the flesh. No, I'm not going to remove it, Paul. Just trust me. My grace is sufficient for you. And then there's Job. Though he slay me, yet will I trust him. And what about you, neighbor? What about you, my Christian brother or sister? Are you able to have that same degree of trust? That same degree of faith? Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. Gideon wanted to know, where are the miracles that God had performed that our fathers had told us about? Just let me see one of these miracles. You and I do not need a miracle in our life to know that God is with us. All we've got to look back on is that cross. All we've got to do is observe what we observed here in the Lord's Supper. God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whoever believes on Him should not perish but have everlasting life. Do you trust in the Lord? Cast your care upon Him, 1 Peter 5 and verse 7, for He cares for you. You see, my friends, those of us who live a life of trusting the Lord despite the circumstances that may come upon us, one day we're going to step out of pain into paradise. One day we're going to step out of this turmoil into a glorious new home to be with the Lord forever and forever. Do you trust that? Can you build your life upon that? If you can, then answer the invitation of Jesus. Come unto me, all of you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. If you believe Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and you're willing to repent of your sins and confess your faith in Him, be baptized for the remission of your sins, you can be raised to walk in newness of life. You will experience bad things upon this earth, but that is a proof of life. And the great physician is He who gives life. You're subject to the invitation. Why don't you come as together we stand and as we sing.